This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have the highly acclaimed author of multiple amazing thrillers, Taylor Adams, here to talk about his new release, Her Last Breath. Welcome, Taylor.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Oh my goodness, this book physically took my breath away. So many times. It was so amazing. But before we jump in, can you start listeners off with an overview of what the story is about?
Her Last Breath, it's a thriller about two best friends who embark on a caving trip in the kind of the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. And one of them is very adventurous and experienced with caving. And one of them honestly just kind of wishes she would have stayed home and read a book. And as they descend, they both start to suspect that someone dangerous has followed them down into the depths. And so pretty soon our heroines are in this life or death situation in a tiny crawl space in pitch blackness. And the only way to stay alive is to keep going forward deeper underground. So I really tried to hit on as many fears as I could with this one. And I had a lot of fun.
Well, I had a lot of fun too, but it's kind of hard to call it fun because there was so much terror.
It's like fun.
Exactly. I just went from one thing to another, and I'm sorry, I have to start off with the setting of this book. You talked about a cave in the Pacific Northwest, and I did my darndest to find this cave, but could not. So I am assuming that you drew from multiple locations and it's fictional. Is that correct?
Absolutely, completely made up cave. I took a lot of things that I saw in in videos of real caves, and kind of cherry picked for things that like, oh, that's scary. Okay, that's creepy. I might want to use that, and just kind of came up with a completely fictional cave, and then that gave me the flexibility to really kind of customize its layout to what the story needed. So it was like, okay, I need a really steep drop here. I need some really creepy rocks here. I need the most miserable flooded tunnel crawl that I can imagine right here. It gave me a lot of flexibility to do that. And I think generally with my settings, because I tend to trap characters in settings, I always like to have that flexibility to make it up a little bit and just kind of draw from reality, but let the layout of the environment be fictional.
It was amazing, this cave, because not only did it have one successively bad place after another, but it also had some lore to it that you created.
Yeah, lore is kind of fun.
And that really, as bad as it were, if you were to just describe to someone each of these kind of chambers, if you will, within this system, you would be so horrified. But then you added the lore, and one of the characters tells the story of the lore in such a chillingly painful way that it stays with you throughout the story. And even though you kind of know what's coming because you've given us descriptions of these chambers, the overlay of the lore makes it beyond terrifying. How much fun was it to come up with your own lore?
Oh, entirely too much fun. And and I had to be really careful because I know what story you're talking about there. I knew with this one to really like flesh the setting out, the cave out as the setting, I kind of needed to treat it as a character, and I couldn't just like jump right into the action the way I like to do, with some of my other books. And so with that story, with that lore, that was kind of my way of trying to sort of set the reader's expectations. So even though it's going to be a little while before things truly get this bad, like here's a preview of how bad things can get and will get. And I just basically tried to imagine what I find to be the most horrifying situation I can come up with. And that was kind of the big influence on the last, especially the last 50 pages or so of the book, where things get, truly bad.
I notice I'm starting to hold my breath again. I'm just going to go back in time a little bit away from those last 50. When you came up with this story, had you done caving before? Was it something that you had done often? Was it something you had just tried? How did it become the thing for this story?
A little bit. I'd been to a few caves before, and I'd always thought they were really cool. You know, nothing really adventurous, nothing like nearly as scary as what I needed to do for this book. But I'm actually surprised it took me this many books to realize just how cool of a setting a cave would be for a book. Because, I've done like rest stops and isolated beaches and everything. But this one, it took me a long time I think I had a setting before I had a story for this one. I remember, it took a while to nail down the story itself, but I knew I wanted to write a book in a cave because there's just so much fun stuff to work with. And I was actually throughout writing the book, I was really nervous because I was thinking, okay, in the back of my mind, I'm probably not going to be writing another book set in a cave anytime soon. So it was like, okay, don't mess this up. Like, try and really use every bit of like what makes a cave scary, like, spiders and drowning and the way your eyes can play tricks on you in the dark, and and then just all the physical ways that a cave can be dangerous, or rocks falling on you or falling or bumping your head. Everything I could think of. I just threw everything in there.
And then you give us this other peril, which is there someone behind them, and do they need to keep going into the deeper, worse and worse, ever worsening depths of this cave? And it had me thinking about survival a lot and wondering, sometimes it's the lesser of two evils, but I don't think you gave us a lesser of two evils. I don't think you gave us that choice, Taylor. How hard was it to continually deal with that? Because you let me back up a little bit. You do present the story through different points of view to some degree. You give us different characters, kind of perspectives, and their insight into how the story is unfolding. So to some degree, we're not always in that evil scenario, but it's informing everything that the reader experiences. So that concept of survival, have you ever been in situations like that where you've...
Nope.
Good.
Thank goodness.
Good. I'm glad you have.
Very happy. I hope I never am too.
Yeah, because it was so much fun, and looking at the different characters and how they respond to these, oh, there is no lesser of two evil scenarios. So what do I do? And then what is evil? Because there's the concept of nature is nature, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but you gave us some backstory on one of the characters, and it was a situation that was a very perilous situation in their past. But they looked at it and they had a response to it that was very empathetic towards nature. And I thought that was so impressive. And then you foiled that against, maybe the real evil is coming from people. Nature's just being nature, right?
Yeah, I like what you said there, because that is a really important character trait too. I think if it's the character I'm thinking of, if I'm understanding right, like, I really wanted to show those sorts of, kindnesses. And it was a very tricky format to write, because I had to be very careful with what I showed about each character at each time. And then, because the perspectives are split out, in a way, it's like each character is kind of the protagonist of the story for a little while. Like, even the villain can kind of pushes the story in some ways when we're with them. And it was a lot from a pacing and structuring point of view. And I mean, I outlined this one so many times, and I rewrote it so many times, and I made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of my drafts were just cleaning up mistakes that I'd made in the prior draft.
Well, all the hard work that went into it paid off, and then some, because it is a brilliant thriller. Like I said, holding my breath. But at the same time, it is a brilliant mystery. And there was so much, I had so much fun going in one direction and then having you giving me other clues that might lead to another set of circumstances or conclusions. And oh my goodness, if it had just been a mystery, I would have been absolutely on cloud nine. If it had just been a thriller, I would have been on cloud nine. I don't even have words for what you did, Taylor, because you did them both so well together.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. I'm really glad that I did the structure the way I did, because I didn't want the whenever you do a story that's in one location, one of the biggest challenges that you have, and one of the things that's always like high on my mind, is making sure that the location doesn't start to feel stale or repetitive. And by setting some of the story in a dual timeline where we're kind of untangling what happened and and what Tess is remembering in a totally different setting, that really, I think, let me, when we did go back to the cave, I felt like by changing the tempo, it kept the cave from wearing out its welcome, or ceasing to be as scary as I needed it to be for certain sequences. Because it's like we weren't there the entire time. We keep stepping out and then kind of thinking a little more cerebrally about, okay, how did this work, and then we're back in the cave.
Which was so fun because you gave the reader a chance to breathe and to
Yeah.
process the mystery. And I don't think if we had been in the cave so long that the mystery would have worked as well, because the reader you never would have laid off the gas pedal and allowed us to have a minute.
Right. Right.
And so it was so great. One of the other things I loved in this, you do female leads very, very well. You write them so very well. And one of the main characters in this is a woman who's not kind of in that stereotypical, you've got a thriller and it's an action thriller. And she's not really in that age demographic. And I loved how you put her in against this world that is highly action intensive, yet you showed her in brilliant and beautiful ways. What was the inspiration for that character?
Well, I really enjoy watching. I watched a lot of police interrogation videos, and also read a lot of transcripts of those interrogations. And I always thought that was a really kind of a fascinating situation to explore in a thriller. I mean, it was kind of daunting, because I've never really written a cop as a character, and I don't know a lot about how they do what they do, and I didn't want it to feel inauthentic. And generally, when cops are in my books, they tend to just kind of show up and then die. So this was very different for me, and I wanted to kind of create a character who you root for them, but you root for them in a different way than you do Tess or Allie, because they're kind of like your co-pilot as you make your way through the story, and they're kind of helping you. You're putting it together the same time they are, and you're hoping that they put it together fast enough, because you sense that there's some urgency to it. And I was also really careful. One decision I made with this character was, unless I absolutely had to, I didn't name any of the people in her life. And I hope that doesn't make her feel one-dimensional, but I just wanted the focus to be on Tess and Allie and what happens in the cave. And so I tried to be a little more, to kind of keep the reader at a distance from the detective, because like, she really is kind of a lens that we're seeing the story through and processing the story through. And she's very, very intelligent, and she makes some very critical decisions toward the end that were a lot of fun for me to write. But yeah, that was another thing I had to be careful with, was just, when you've got multiple viewpoints, it's like you want the story to feel in balance. And I didn't want to spend too much time with one character and have the story kind of become their story, when it needs to kind of be a cohesive thing.
Yeah, this is all part of why I was curious about her, because I really, really loved her character. And
Good.
I loved what she brought to the table. And now you saying it, I realized that you did make references to whoever it was in her life, was a family member, her this, or coworker, her this or that, enough to inform us about who she is and what we think she's capable of, or where she might go, but not enough to take us off of, again, Tess and Allie and what's going on for them. So you've done some caving.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit, okay. If you were to have a friend who invited you along on a caving expedition, it's kind of like that game, I'm going on a picnic and I'm bringing. Okay, so what would Taylor be bringing now that you've written this story?
Oh my God! From after writing this story, a gun, I guess. I don't know. I'd say a radio, but radios don't work underground. That was one of the really interesting things. Researching this book. I mean, when you're underground, it's so limiting. You're at the mercy of the layout of the cave itself. And that's always one of the questions I have to answer with my books is, okay, why can nobody call for help? Why can nobody's cell phones work? And at least with this one, the setting solved that problem immediately. Like, okay, it's a cave. But I'd love to go in more caves, just nothing like what's in this book.
Yeah, nothing like what's in this book, because it's always those things where, your friend calls you and is like, hey, I've got this great idea. And it never quite works out that way, does it?
No.
No, it never quite does. But one of the things you touched on, because again, it's a survival story to some degree, right, is courage. And there's different characters displaying courage in different ways. Arguably, even the detective is given
Oh yeah.
what's going on in her life, right? What did you want to get across about courage? Do you think it's something that we can obtain, or do you think it's something that's always within us?
I think it's something that is kind of within everybody because, like you said, everybody has a moment to shine. Even the villain in the story has some moments of pretty considerable courage. Yeah, there's a lot of different, even there's a courageous character, a character we know is very courageous at the very end, who acts courageous in a different way that we haven't seen from this person's character yet. So yeah, I mean, it's really one thing that I liked about the story was that by splitting the focus on all the different characters, each character, even the villain, is an underdog in some way. And so the cave kind of humbles everybody, and everybody is fighting that same internal battle with it and the limitations that it's imposing on them, and the ticking clock, and honestly, just the physical terror of what they're going through. And I think some of the really hard decisions that characters make especially toward the very end, it really just comes down to kind of rolling the dice and going, okay, I've got certain death on one side and I've got a 90% chance of dying, and I'm just going to take the 90% chance and just go for it, because what else can you do? And I find that really inspiring, because that's not an easy choice to make. And especially at the end with a very particular sequence, this is basically my nightmares described. So this is, to do what these characters do it really takes a lot.
It really does. And I was reflecting, I had heard an interview that you had given a while ago, and you made, Christmas season is over, but some people refer to this movie as a Christmas movie, and that is Die Hard. And
Of course.
you made a reference in this interview talking about how sometimes these amazing female leads that you write, that you inject a little bit of that lead character into these characters. And when I heard that, I said, I totally got that. I totally got it 1,000,000%. It was so darn good, because you put the characters into situations, and that movie, I think, was unique in that way. I think people of a certain age remember that movie and being blown away, because you'd think, okay, we're done. We're done. We're just done. This is a binary choice. You're not going to make that choice. So we're done. The story's over. But no, the story's not over. How is it that character kind of seeps into your other characters?
Oh man, I've always loved. I love it when even in an action hero role, when the hero is still really human and makes mistakes. And I mean, there's a scene in Die Hard where he has to, because he doesn't have shoes, he has to run across broken glass, and you feel that, and that that would really hurt, but that's a choice that he makes, because the other alternative is death. And I'm drawn to those kinds of heroes in both in stories that I try to write, and then in just the stories that I like to consume, because I think it's really fun to see characters who are, imperfect and flawed and unprepared for the situation they're in, but rising to meet that situation, through sometimes just through sheer will. I love that. I think it's so fun.
Well, all I can say is I started reflecting. I don't think it's something I was ever really aware of, how many caves I've been to in my life. So after I closed the book, I thought, well, gee, how many caves have I been to and where have I been? And I realized it's something that draws me, but it's something I'm always cautious about. So whether it's ice caves in Iceland or even in Ireland or different places, I live in California. There's amazing, not just natural caves, but there's old mines and all sorts of things that you can poke around and discover. And I realized my favorite cave was in Italy. There's a town called Orvieto where Signorelli's frescoes are there in the cathedral. And it's this amazing cave. It goes back to the time of the Etruscans. They were actually using that cave. And
Oh, cool.
the Etruscans, everybody's used that cave. And even during World War II, they used it when there were, bombing raids were going on. And that the people in the town would go down there for protection, and they store olive oil under the, done all these things with it. And I realized, as much fear as there is in them, they're also almost like their own little museums that keep the history of Earth and, in some places, the history of humans alive to us. And so it was just, oh my God, it was just like the most mind-blowing thing to look back on my cave experiences and say, thank God I didn't go in there.
I need to write that down, though. That sounds really cool. I love caves. So,
and I am so very happy that I read this novel. It took me on an amazing journey, and oh my God, it was so darn good.
Thank you. That's so amazing to hear.
I would like to ask, on behalf of your existing fans and your future fans, where is the best place for folks to find out what's coming next?
I would say Instagram. I'm not great at social media, but I'm learning. I'm getting a little better. So I'd say Instagram or Facebook. And I've got a website too. It's tayloradamsauthor.com. But all three of those are good ways to keep tabs on me and what I'm working on next.
Well, I am so glad. I cannot wait for your next book. Again, this one is called Her Last Breath, and it will take your breath away. Thank you again, Taylor.
Thank you. This was so fun. I really appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.